It always comes first to all of us. It demands everything and gives everything for us. I'm talking about family, that centerpiece of our lives, the place of origin, that gives us a sense of meaning and empowers us with purpose. You may be searching for one, starting one, or involved in one. We hope that through this season, you will explore with us the purpose, plan, and power of our families in shaping our lives through hearing our stories and sharing yours. In this sixth season of Let Us Go Deeper podcast, we look forward to learning and equipping you with resources and reasons to more faithfully and fulfillingly engage and contribute in building a healthy family. Welcome to Season 6 of Let Us Go Deeper, the podcast. Pastor, there's real data out there showing that the family unit in our society today, in the culture we find ourselves in, is under assault in some ways. At least the family values that are undergirding the whole setup of a family, at least the nuclear family, are under assault because in many ways the forces, external forces from the world, from media, from the culture at large, and internal forces in terms of how we are struggling to build healthy relationships with our partners and within the family circle are causing big fissures into this family unit that is so critical to the building of the society.
I don't think the forces external to the family are forces to really worry us. The media, what society says, changing norms. If a family internally is well constituted, it can withstand the onslaught of these things around it. Even though I must also admit that a family really is a miniature example of its culture. What I'm saying is we have our national culture, be it Kenyan, Ugandan, American, Caribbean culture. Then we have the ethnic culture, because there are some groups that have different ethnic groups in a nation that maintain certain cultural separateness or identity. So we have Chinatowns in America, Little Italy, where they sort of maintain a certain different culture from that which is overall. But then we have family culture, because each family within a society develops its own way of doing things. So culture actually is my way of doing things.
It's interesting because one way you can look at what we've been trying to do this season is to understand how the family is this starting point of what we see out into society. You know, all these effects of how someone comes out of that family space are seen out in society. So for me, it's interesting in terms of trying to understand these external factors, because I think even the culture that we see out in society, the Little Italies, the Chinese culture, the whatever culture we see out there, has its roots in a family culture. That's where you start getting trained on how to behave and act in these spaces.
It's a loop, Joel. It's a loop, because the family reflects the culture in which it lives and imparts that culture to the next generation. When God told Adam and Eve in Genesis 1, 27, 28, do you mind reading that first? Genesis 1, 27 and 28.
Yeah, it reads, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female. He created them. Then God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth.
So here God creates a man and a woman and says, procreate.
Yeah.
Duplicate yourselves. Create families that will now cover the whole earth from this central core of Adam and Eve.
So even in that text alone, then it seems to me then everything starts from the family of those two.
Yes. And they would then impart to their children the knowledge of God, etc. And as they moved out, they would take that knowledge with them.
Yeah.
Ideally, that is what should have been.
Because part of the exposition, Pastor, and sorry for cutting you off, is that what God is saying in chapter 20, verse 27 and 28 is giving them a cultural mandate. This is how you're going to create the world. This is how you will go out there and establish an extended version of what I've given you.
Right. But remember, culture develops from the interaction of people.
Mm-hmm.
Culture is not something static. It develops, it changes over time. And culture is simply our way of doing things.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're Americans, this is how Americans do this. This is how South Americans do this. This is how Chinese do this. So this is what is culture really. The way in which we interact in our context, social context, to keep harmonious living, etc. So in some cultures, people say hello by bowing. In some cultures, like the French and Spanish culture, it is even reflected in their language. If you meet someone for the first time, or it is someone who is older than you, for instance, you don't address them in a familiar way. You address them in what we call the polite form. In American culture, that is not such a big thing in the English culture. So culture is simply how we do things. Mm-hmm. And as people moved off, they will find ways to do things. So like I was saying before, culture is the national culture. This is how we do things in this country, basically. Then there's the ethnic culture, this people group, how we interact among ourselves. But then in a family, a culture is developed as well that is unique to that family. That will be a reflection of the general culture, but yet they are individual way we do things. So basically, when I get married, when I begin to produce, I am now creating a new nucleus, a new group that I will now inculcate some of the principles that came to me from the culture in general, and hoping that they will perpetuate what I think will be good ways, good manners, etc. for that time and that culture.
And that's interesting because in chapter 2 actually of Genesis, the Bible does say, the man shall leave his father and mother and go and start his family with his wife.
Right. And again, he would be taking with him what he got from his family of origin. She would be bringing from her family of origin the culture that they had, and they will blend together. In fact, I've discovered this, Joel. Intercultural marriages are more challenging than interracial marriages.
Interesting
because
observation.
If you have a white man who grows up in Kenya, would have a Kenyan culture.
Mm-hmm. So those normative practices are much more powerful than the external
yes.
attributes of any one human being.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So white culture is only white culture because white people grew up in a certain social context.
Yeah, and there's a way they do things.
Right. Black culture is only black culture because we've grown up in this way. But if I take a white man and place him among black people or vice versa, they would reflect the overarching culture. And this is important because the farther away our cultures are, the greater potential for conflict in the marriage. The closer our cultures are to each other, meaning we are both from the same culture, much more readily will there be harmony.
Mm-hmm.
Because in some of the things we shall be looking at this week, husband's role, the father's role, the mother's role, conflict resolution, disciplining the children, we will see how culture is reflected in this. And therefore, if we have different cultural contexts of how to discipline, for instance, or how to resolve conflicts, you see where harmony would be a much more difficult thing than if we are both operating from that same social context.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things we should establish before we move on is that the word family has taken on different connotations over the ages. Like today we have the nuclear family, we have extended family, we have blended family, we have same-sex family. So all of these are now constituting units of society that will be imparting a culture to the next generation.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're seeking to do today is ask ourselves the question, how can we bring into the dynamics of each individual unit of society, each family, principles, overarching principles that could fit into any cultural context and that will produce harmony, love, and joy
And flourishing of those families.
Yes.
The well-being of those families, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's interesting for me, Pastor Evan, as we carry on this discussion, because it seems to me that as much as we are meant to pick a culture from the families we come from and then put it, and use that as the basis to start our new families, the call is also to go start something new.
In what sense?
In some sense. When you leave your father and mother, you're leaving their practices, their pattern of doing things, and uniting with somebody else to establish a new pattern of doing things.
And that is where each family has an individual culture that reflects the general culture, but is different.
Because I think one thing I've observed in a lot of, even my contemporaries in their marriages, they have a big struggle with leaving or disconnecting, detaching from some of the practices that they learned or they came from their families, because they have been so strongly ingrained that they believe that's the only right way to do things.
That is always dangerous. Yet, there are good things in each culture that we receive.
Right.
And these are the things we want to take into the next generation and carry forward. So let's look at some of these things. For instance, the relationship of sex, love making, show of affection, discipline. They are all reflections of our culture in general and our individual family. And one of the things that we must recognize, and we're going to deal with this more in the next episode, is sex in marriage and adultery. What causes a man or a woman to leave the circle of love of his partner, his spouse or her spouse, to find it somewhere else? What drives a person to commit adultery? Obviously, and we'll just hint at this, there has to be something missing in the present circle of love that causes this person to seek to find it somewhere else. Are you with me?
Mm-hmm.
Because when we get married, we are hoping to be bonded with this person in an eternal tie of togetherness, intimacy, passion and love and joy. But then as the years go by, and this hole never seems to be filled in me, I start looking to fill it. And unfortunately, sometimes we seek to fill it with someone else rather than the one we are committed to for life. So when we think about adultery, we are thinking about someone seeking fulfillment outside of the bond of marriage because they haven't found it there, or because they just have an insatiable appetite for passion and desire. But I think next week when we talk more about sex and marriage, we could look at this some more.
Sure. Yeah. So let's talk about this culture now, maybe in more detail, because I think we need to develop a very good understanding of this cultural thread that runs through society, community, and family, and understand really how do we act within it in a way that, as you said, where we can adopt these norms that even, we ourselves borrow from the values we borrow from even scripture into these cultures to enable us now to really flourish in those spaces.
In our family.
Yes.
Because it is only as our family is well constituted we can impact society in general. Each culture has a concept of fatherhood that overlaps with other cultures. In your culture, who is the father? What is the importance of a father?
He's the lion of the home.
Explain that.
No, he's the strong man. I mean, he's the one who represents symbolically strength and who stands as a provider, as a protector, and as a peace as a peace giver. Yeah, peacekeeper of the home. In a sense.
Is he the one who disciplines usually in your culture?
Predominantly, yes. I think in most cases the fathers take that role, at least they're seen as the ones who enforce that.
I think in most societies, the father provides that sort of leadership in the family. Provider, protector, disciplinarian, lawgiver, sustainer, etc. And these are good principles.
Do those come naturally? Is that like inbuilt into manhood? That role of discipline, or is it something that we have adopted because it's culturally been accepted or been developed?
It is culturally mandated in many ways. by what I see in my own father, by what I hear, by what I see in our society.
Because maybe I'm just stopping here because I'm thinking of my own marriage. I'm married. My wife is from a different culture, and I come from an African culture, which, again, as we were saying, has this very strong male dominance. And I've had to make a lot of adjustments given how I observed my father interact with my mother, to how I relate with my wife, because she's from a Western culture which sort of tries to level things up, sort of tries to make
level the playing field.
Yeah, make every partner have an equal role in every area of the marriage, which it's not been a struggle for me, but I will imagine that for many people it can be a struggle because you want to stamp your foot and act like your father and really be the man of the house, quote unquote. And that can be a struggle for any one person. And again, I'm just wondering, is the Western sense or direction of trying to levelize the field the better model, or this dominance model the better one that I come with from my tradition?
If we look at scripture, we do see that male dominant society, patriarchal society, which is what we're talking about. Yet when we look at some of the great men of scripture, we see a tenderness, a certain co-sharing that is representative of what God would really like among us, especially when we look at Jesus, the way he treated women, the sort of equality and egalitarian attitude Jesus had. We recognize that this male dominant society was never God's ideal, for it says God made them male and female. And he took Eve from Adam's ribs, from his side, not from his foot so he could stand on her, not from his head so she could reign over him, but his equal, someone to walk by his side. That became distorted when sin came in and selfishness and everything.
So do you think maybe the emergence and dominance of patriarchy is partly attributed to those factors you're laying out?
I believe so, yes. But yet, there is a role for the father. For God says himself in Genesis 18, he says, I know Abraham, and that he will lead his family after him and will teach them laws and statutes. So we see even in this, where God appeals to fathers, fathers teach your children. So God himself, in true scripture, is telling us that the man has been given a role, which is what we are talking about, the provider. Our testosterone, our bigger muscles and stuff demonstrate that role of protector and provider that was ingrained in the God divine plan, but that gets lost or distorted in humanity. The other thing is, no young man knows how to be a father in and of himself. It's not intrinsic to be a real father. I can be male and act very male, but not a father. Tender, lawgiver, patient, provider, protector, sacrificial even. That is what I learn as I look at my father, if I have one, and as he teaches me how to be a man. For I must say, a young man or young woman growing up without a father is missing part of the socialization that will make that person balanced in society. A young woman needs a father to affirm her beauty, her loveliness, as he protects her, as he gives her a lovely embrace, as he tells her she looks beautiful, as he tells her to protect her body, to dress in a certain way that doesn't make her just an object of lust. And to feel embraced and loved by a father helps a young woman to know what to look for.
To develop a healthy sense of what manhood is.
Yes.
Yeah.
And to value herself. Many young women who have grown up without a father or a father-like figure in her life find themselves looking for love.
In the wrong places.
In all the wrong places. Needy for that affirmation of a male in her life.
A mother can't provide that? Is that the case you're making then?
A mother would provide the feminine traits, the way she should react to men, how she'd develop and act in society as a mother, as a woman, etc. The tenderness and all of these things that are female. But she needs the man's input, the father's input, to give her that sense of her value as a woman. And in relation to dealing with men in society, to know her true value and worth.
Because it's interesting, Pastor, even as you make these observations, because one of the cases that is being made about, for example, why a large portion of the American society is having issues with just the young people, it's because there's a father figure missing. There's a father missing in the home, right?
Yes.
And so a lot of these young men grow up in homes where they don't have a proper sense of what manhood is. And then as they go out into the world, how they act actually keeps recycling those same trends of not understanding their role as protector, provider, and sort of that solid presence in their family.
I have also found, Joel, as you speak that remember, what we say in this podcast is never for everybody. There will always be
exceptions,
outliers on this side and on that side. But
right.
in general, most young men who grew up in single-parent home with a mother only usually don't turn out to be the best husbands and fathers and men in society, because a woman cannot turn a young boy into a man.
What will you say about Obama?
He had a father figure. His mother married. Then he grew up with his grandparents. He had father figures in his life.
So you're saying then, if there is no father in the home, at least biologically,
right? That's why I said father figure.
So then, for a mother who's bringing up a son or a daughter, then are you prescribing a solution to that gap as exposing this young man,
Definitely.
young woman to the proper father figure?
Yeah, in the church.
To give them a sense of
extended families, uncles.
Yeah.
Your brother, perhaps, he must be exposed to manhood in a way that allows him to identify. Because many women who train up young men, when these young men become teenagers especially, they begin to grow big and tall. Just two things that happen to a mother in this case. She either has to rise up to the challenge by being hard, because there's a natural tendency in young men not to listen to their mothers as they would listen to their fathers. I saw it in my own family with my son, who's really a nice kid. But I saw when I spoke to him, he would react in a certain way that was different if his mom spoke in that
It's the same case for me too, actually.
Yes, something about maybe our deeper voice, our bigger bodies, whatever have you. So many of these women have to become so hard to keep this.
They overcompensate for that
lack, and so they become domineering and kind of keep the boy timid. Most of these guys grow up kind of timid and unsure, or she becomes so overwhelmed by the challenge of this young man that he grows up without any restraining, because now he talks down to her. And she sees him as pappy and in a way that doesn't allow her to be that disciplinarian as she should be. So these guys either become very timid and cowed down, or kind of rebellious and without real restraint. Again, not everyone, but far too often, this is what I see.
And Pastor, maybe to stop here, because there's something I admire so much, and I've told you this in the past. For example, the way I see you relate with your daughters. It's very interesting because from the culture I come that I come from, men or fathers don't relate to their daughters the way you do. I sense that you have this very collegial, very close connection with your daughters. Is that part of how you're practicing this? Because I do sense that part of their confidence and even their own sense of identity comes from knowing that they have seen a real man in you.
But I'm glad to hear that. Yes, I deliberately chose to nurture that tenderness and relationship with my daughters. Even as the new dad, don't mess with dad, they also knew they could come and sit on my lap, give me a hug, we will sit and talk. They can tell me what their fears are, their desires. Hey dad, I like this guy likes me, I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking about that.
So even as they are adults, not just when they're little girls, because I guess at some point some dads will say, oh, now she's a big girl, she can figure it out for herself.
No, even as adults. Because in this complex world we are living in which East meets West, in which we live in this cosmopolitan mixing pot of cultures, especially here in America, we need to allow our children to navigate life in the best way possible. And that happens in the home, which brings me to the point of discipline. So if a father is a protector, a provider, a sustainer, the one who imparts rules and discipline, along with his wife, of course, we'll talk about the wife shortly. If a father allows a son to see what a man should be, the strength and character of a man, allows a woman to see her worth, because my dad is such a great guy and he loves me, he reminds me I'm beautiful, etc. This is what I need to find in a man. This is who I am. I don't need to find love in all the wrong places. The question becomes, how do we do this? What family culture would allow this impartation of identity in the children, both male and female? How we parent. The parenting and discipline of a child becomes key to imparting cultural relevance and good principles.
Yeah, and I think that's where there's a lot of clash here between how the culture, how the general secular culture approaches this and how maybe us from the religious culture approach this. I think that there is a sense in which in the secular culture maybe discipline and punishment is handled very differently because it's maybe seen as being egregious on the well-being of the child. Whereas I think scripturally speaking, the mandate here is to really be a teacher, be a guide, even at times when you need to show some tough love for that process to go forward.
Well, maybe Proverbs 23, 13 and 14 can help us a bit here.
That reads, do not withhold correction from a child,
Right.
for if you beat him with a rod, he will not die. You shall beat him with a rod and deliver his soul from hell. Pastor, this is very extreme language for discipline.
And
This seems more like punishment.
And it comes up far often in Proverbs and in other parts of the scripture, this issue of spanking, of the rod of correction. So let's talk a bit about the rod of correction and see if we could perhaps come to a very balanced view of this rod of correction. For most people, when they think about rod of correction, they are thinking only of spanking, hitting that child. And I believe that is involved in this. But in other places where Solomon talks about the rod of discipline, the rod of correction, you sense it is more than simply spanking, of
Than
striking.
a physical act
Yes.
of
Yes.
pain, transferring pain.
Yes. So let's begin by determining that punishment and discipline are not the same. Would you agree with that?
Yeah,
Punishment
because
and discipline are
punishment
not
to me
synonymous.
seems to be more an exertion of revenge or anger,
You sure?
at least
Would you
in
go down that road?
its negative connotation. To punish really is to exert some kind of
It's inflict pain,
yeah.
discomfort, yes.
so it does give that sense that it's sort of this barbaric way of inflicting
Ooh,
some
are you calling Solomon barbaric? Okay.
No, I'm just saying that's what comes to mind, because if you speak to a 21st century American and say you got to punish your child, that is very strong language.
I will never tell a parent you need to punish your child. I will say you need to discipline your child.
Why?
But in disciplining your child, there is a place for punishment. Are we together?
Yeah.
We cannot encapsulate discipline in this little bottle of punishment. Far too often, that is all we know.
So it's the other way around then.
Punishment fits into discipline. It
Yes.
is one of the modes of discipline.
Yeah, I will agree with that.
But unfortunately, in many cultures and in many homes, punishment is synonymous
With discipline.
with discipline.
Yeah.
But punishment is retributive, meaning you did something wrong, so you must pay for it. And how do you pay for it? By suffering some pain, some discomfort. And that is necessary sometimes. So we're going to come to that in a moment, this issue of spanking and punishment. But the real goal of child rearing and training, of parenting even, is to teach the child to discipline himself.
Dispassionately.
Give me that again.
Dispassionately, because I think, I'm jumping here the gun a little bit here, but I think that one of the reasons we overemphasize punishment is because of our feelings.
Let's not go there yet.
Sure.
Let's not go there yet. We want to establish the fact that my role as a father, your role as a father, Cynthia's role as a mother, Holly's role as a mother, and every mother and father is to teach that child how to discipline himself, to inculcate cultural norms that are positive and healthy, so that child, as they grow, can now enter society as a functioning, effective, adequate member of that society in which he or she lives.
I like that. I like that it's to train them on how to discipline themselves.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's a very good vision, because ultimately after 18 years, Once they get to 18 years old, they walk out of the house and they got to start their own life and really figure things out for themselves.
And if that young man or woman has not learned to discipline himself,
or has hated or has had this negative sense of discipline,
then we have someone who is no longer effective, able to move in society in an effective manner, in a happy manner, to integrate society even.
able to constrain himself and to really handle himself
Yes.
rightly. Yeah.
And the only way, the best way for me to teach my child self-discipline is to be disciplined myself. Because parents how they have been parented. If my father used to lose his temper and just lash out at everyone in the home, I would have a tendency to think that is parenting, unless new information comes to me that teaches me that that is not the way. On the other hand, if I have not learned to discipline myself, I will be inconsistent in my discipline and passionate in my discipline, which would tend to be punishment, as you were mentioning before. I cannot parent a child until I parent myself. If I want to teach my child truthfulness,
I have to be truthful.
if I want to teach my child kindness,
I have to be kind.
yes,
And if I have to teach my child discipline, I have to be disciplined.
right.
Huh.
So disciplining a child, correcting, means I am teaching that child how to be an effective, well-functioning, happy member of society, how to integrate the outer culture when they leave home. So I have to teach norms. How do we sit at a table? How do we eat? How do we greet others? Show respect, have good manners within the social context in which we live. How to work hard, how to cook, how to clean. These are some of the things. But then I also have to use consequences. Consequences are let me put it in this way. Consequences represent the parent allowing the child to suffer the pain of his own actions. Are you with me still?
Mm-hmm.
So you say, Nico, don't run like that and jump from the couch. You may hurt yourself. That's what you said. But he insists on jumping. And he falls and hits his face. That's the consequence of his actions. A wise parent would see that as a great teaching moment. When you recognize with a quick glance, okay, he's okay, he hasn't really hurt himself, you need to let him live that pain. Which says parents need to talk less. We talk too much as parents.
In terms of how we are trying to teach and discipline and
yes.
bring up the little ones.
So when the child runs into a wall, and smacks his nose, and you look, you realize, okay, he's okay. Stay silent. If he comes crying, Dad, he says, I'm so sorry, man, I'm so sorry. It will ease up shortly, and I'm so sorry. So you're showing I'm really sorry. But what most parents would do is lecture. You see, I told you not to run. You see what running does? You shouldn't run. The child knows he ran. He knows that's why he hit into the wall. He's not foolish.
So you are recommending that we let the children process that experience
Yes.
by themselves.
Once I begin to talk and lecture, I have prevented the child from
Developing,
processing that action, consequence, cause, effect. And now it is all mommy's fault. It's now daddy. And what usually the child does, he cries more. Have you noticed? I'm sure you've noticed this. If Nico is running and he falls and you don't pay him attention, he gets up, dusts himself and runs again.
Yeah.
If you look at him and only show that I see you fell, they tend to cry. Oh, mommy. They are not playing with our emotions, seeking sympathy. So I say parents talk too much. You don't negotiate with a rebellious, angry child who is having a temper tantrum. No, don't. That is not the point for negotiation. We talk too much. So we need to let the child suffer the consequences. Of course, if he's riding a bike down a hill, you're not going to let him suffer that consequence because he could seriously hurt himself. So as a parent, part of parenting is to decide if that action would bring a consequence that will not hurt the child in a permanent or devastating way, to let him feel it.
So it's interesting because what you're saying here is that as a parent really is to manage your your sense of intervention.
Yes.
To say, this case, let them learn. This case, let me step in and help them learn.
Yes.
And not always wanting to be ahead of it.
In the case of riding the bike down the hill, you will say, you know what, Nico, I'm going to take this bike from you until you learn to ride it more responsibly. So you won't have the bike for the next 2 days or for the next hour, as the case might be. This is me preventing him from suffering the consequence of his action by me creating a consequence. I take the bike away.
Yeah.
Or no TV tonight because you didn't do your homework. This is where now I create a consequence that is in accordance with what was done.
You're making me now develop a new definition for parenting, which is parenting is the proper intervention in the development of a child.
Oh, that's beautifully put, Joel. And part of that intervention sometimes is the strap or the rod or whatever you use to discipline. Some people say don't use your bare hand. This hand should always be represented by love and tenderness, but use a switch, a belt, as the case might be. I believe in spanking. The question is, when do we spank? Some people say, well, if I've spoken to him 2 or 3 times. No, after the first time. If you knew he heard you. There's no need to tell a child the same thing 2 or 3 times before taking action. If you know the child heard you the first time. Spanking is reserved for the child when he wants to prove who is a man or woman in the house. When you are reasserting who is
the authority.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's interesting, Pastor, because one case I've made about proper parenting is exposing the child to the right kind of pain.
Yes.
And not just always shielding and trying to keep them away from pain, because you are then doing them a disservice to the reality of the world that exists out there, where they will actually face pain for certain actions and get punished for those actions.
I used to tell my children, I am allowing you to suffer this little pain to avoid you suffering a greater pain before I spank them. Mm-hmm. And I would tell them why they're being spanked. 3 strikes for doing this. If I said 3, that's what you got, 3. I didn't give you 4, but I didn't give you 2 either. They knew the system in which how many strikes for whatever you did, as the case might be. And then I will allow them to cry their heart out. I will never spank a child and then come and hug you up immediately, because at that point, you don't want daddy to hug you.
Yeah. So, Pastor, I think we are going over here the half-hour mark, and I'm just wondering, I know that there are a few other areas you want to cover, that maybe in other ways to come around to this point of parenting is to say that parents need to be aware, to be self-aware of their own emotional state.
Yes,
so that they can properly engage with the child as they grow up, and not to let their own frustrations, disappointment, anger be the drive of how they discipline a child, because then now that distorts how a child sees your so-called discipline.
Then it is not discipline, it's punishment,
right.
It's frustration, it's vengeance. That is not discipline. No parent should ever discipline a child in anger and frustration. It would be best to just leave it alone until you calm down. And this is where having 2 parents is good. Where I could say, you know what, honey, I'm so frustrated with this child today. You take over this afternoon.
The good cop, bad cop scenario.
Yeah, because if I'm frustrated, I may hurt that child. I may go beyond what is necessary for the child to learn the lesson. And then what the child learns is those who are bigger take advantage of those who are smaller. So when I get big, I'm gonna do the same.
Probably thing. That's the lesson a lot of us learned.
Yes. So we don't ever want to do that. Really.
Yeah.
But spanking is always necessary when a child becomes rebellious and challenges your authority in open rebellion and disrespect. This is where you show who is the king in the home. Which brings us now to the issue of conflict resolution. Again, we are talking about family culture. How do we do things in this family that will allow us to interact with the rest of society in which we live? Conflict resolution. Part of the harmony in a home is how we deal with
conflict, yeah.
And there will always be
conflict. We have talked about this actually, I think, in 2 seasons ago about conflict resolution in the home. Yeah. So that would be a good reference to go deeper into this.
Solomon said, better to live in the corner of a housetop than in a sprawling house with a nagging woman. And I could hear many women saying, oh, a nagging man, and I agree. Why do you think Solomon would say that? But better to live in a housetop, in a corner of a housetop, rather than in a sprawling mansion.
It's irritating to live in the presence of somebody who's nagging. It can be very jarring to one's emotions.
Yes. In other words, even though I have a whole big house with all the luxuries, that constant dripping, he says nagging is like a constant dripping of water. Tick, 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 tick on your brain. He says living in just a little space with peace is better than luxury in turmoil. But nagging doesn't just happen. Nagging has a cause. Why do you think people nag?
Oh, there's a whole range of reasons here, Pastor. I mean, some justified, but some not. And I think people nag because essentially there's a deficiency in the relationship, in one aspect of the relationship. It could be communication, could be a lack of a misunderstanding or a lack of understanding. It could be that there is definitely a whole range of issues that could develop this issue of nagging, and also it could be it could be temperamental as well, because I think some people are naturally naggers, so to say.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Usually people nag because there's a need that is not being met. And they nag to draw attention to the fact that I have something that is troubling me. Like a squeaky door hinge. It will squeak, squeak, squeak until you
oil it.
Yes. In a sense, nagging is saying, oil me. Right? Or some people just love to hear their voice and irritate you. The point I'm trying to say is, if conflicts are not resolved in a harmonious, understanding manner that brings peace and understanding, there will be that nagging, that sense of unhappiness, that uneasiness in the home that destroys the harmony that we all look for in marriage. And the way parents resolve conflict will be reflected in the way children handle it. So if mommy and daddy go at each other with harsh words and violence, the children would do that.
Mirror that, yeah.
Yes, mirror that. And children would normally fight. And this will be, again, parents will come in and help them resolve their issues. I remember with our children, there was a rule. You could not call each other by any name like stupid or dumb or anything. You couldn't address each other like that. You had to resolve your conflict. So if they were playing and they began to fight about something, we said, okay, what's the matter? Well, he took my toy. Whatever. We said, okay, who had it first, whatever have you. And if they couldn't get together, we would say, okay, the game is over. And we're taking this toy. When you guys are ready to decide how you would play with it, come to us. We would tell them, okay, make a plan. Who would play with it first and then who would play with it after, and then come to us with your plan. What we tried to do was to teach them conflict resolution, because there will always be conflict. How I go about it will determine if it escalates or if it dies down.
And this is an interesting observation, Pastor, because I think now, even in the world we find ourselves where there's conflict at the societal level, at the national level, it could be that we have not created these good habits and patterns from the families where the young ones are trained on how to resolve conflicts amicably, so that as they grow out into society, they're able to handle these bigger sorts of conflicts that develop.
I believe so. Look at politics in our country. You could tell who had great resolution skills in the home and who had to win at all costs. Because most of us, we see conflict as I win, you lose.
Yeah,
or
a zero-sum game, yeah.
I lose, and I don't want to lose, so I'm going to do everything to win. But true conflict resolution seeks to say, how could you win and I win? How could we both leave here as winners? Sometimes it will mean compromising, negotiating, not getting all I want. But that is part of life. Nobody gets all he or she wants. So true conflict resolution that happens in the home is where we sit and we seek to find the best way for both you and me to walk away from this situation happy with what we got and happy
with each other.
With each other.
Yeah.
And that has to be passed on to children. And a lot of what is happening in politics today show I must win and you lose at all cost. But society would be so much better if we had a win-win attitude. Let's both walk away from this happy with what we got, but still happy with each other. And finally, the two ends of the home, the father and the mother, with the children in the middle. Again, we are talking about the nuclear family. Becomes the important element in the family structure. The father, we already talked about the father. Now we talk about the mother. I tell people, it is the wife who paints the color of the family. Her spirit, her temperament is what gives the flavor to the family. The husband provides the paint. The way I love my wife, the way I treat her, will allow her to know, through her feminine, nurturing quality, to make flowers of beautiful yellows and blues and greens, or whether it will be reds and blacks and strident colors and conflict. A woman's role in the family is so critical because they are gifted with empathy, with compassion, with intuition, with a nurturing spirit that far surpasses anything that man naturally has. Solomon in Proverbs 31 pictured this woman. Maybe you could read a couple verses first. Proverbs 31 from verse 10. Let's see what he says.
That reads, "Who can find a virtuous wife?
Yes.
For her worth is far above that of rubies. The heart of her husband safely trusts her, so he will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not evil all the days of her life.
Keep going.
She seeks wool and flax and willingly works with the hands. She is like the merchant ships. She brings her food from afar. She also rises while it's still yet dark and provides food for her household and a portion for her maidservants."
There has been this trend in Christianity about the Proverbs 31 woman, where many young women are told, this is what you need to be. This is the kind of woman a man is looking for and you need to be. And many young women have burned themselves out trying to be a Proverbs 31 woman. If you read this carefully, you would see this woman is a go-getter. She's always going, always working. There's nothing about her husband nurturing her, caressing her, romancing her, of her children. Everything is what she gives. No woman could fulfill all of this without burning herself out. I believe this is a composite picture of what a woman should bring, what good women bring to marriage. Are you with me? Mm-hmm. He's not saying any one woman can or should encapsulate all of these qualities in Proverbs 31, 10 to 31, but saying a good woman will bring these sort of qualities into a marriage, into a home. Because really, a woman's nurturing and tenderness is really what creates that joy in the family. My daughter likes to say, Sarah, happy wife, happy life. And that is so true. If a woman is happy in the home, you have a happy home. The children feel secure. The husband wants to come home. If she's upset, if she's nagging because her needs are not being met, there's turmoil, there's unrest. And so women need to understand your husbands need you, your children need you. We provide the paint by our tenderness, by our provision.
The paint.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like the pain.
Oh, no. The paint. Yes, thank you. By our love, our nurture, our provision, our taking charge of the discipline in many cases. You provide that color. You paint it. You are the one that's painting and deciding what colors we have. Proverbs 31 is a good place to look to see some of the qualities that would make a good wife, a good spouse, a good companion to a man. But don't try to imitate this woman, because we really believe it's a composite picture of all the good traits that women bring into marriage. So basically, we have looked at family culture, Joel. This family culture that reflects the greater culture, but in itself influences the culture. This culture that says, this is how we do things. This is how I am as a father in my home. This is how I am as a mother in my home. This is how we discipline our children in our home. This is how we encourage them to live together in our home, so that when they go out into society, they are well-functioning, well-adjusted members of society who can integrate and be an impact for good in society as well.
Yeah, powerful, Pastor. And, even as you finish there about the woman, there's a sermon I preached some time back on Mother's Day. And, I was really trying to make the point that as God describes the woman in Scripture, one thing that becomes very clear is that the woman is such a central piece of that creation. And even God does identify as a mother,
Yes.
And this idea that the woman is the Ebenezer, the rock, the stone that protects, that also helps, that shields. And actually, in fact, Scripture, when you do some of those translations, does compare woman to the one who goes to war for the family. She's the one who goes to war for the family. And I think that appreciation of the role of a mother, of a wife, of a woman in the home is so critical to elevate the status of a woman, because, as we were saying again, given as this sense that the woman is inferior, and there's this superiority complex that has come into how we interact with our spouses.
Yeah, that is so sad. But when we look at Scripture, we see something interesting. God calls himself our Father. In that context, he says, fathers, train your children, provide for your children, teach. But God also portrays himself as a mother. Mm-hmm. And in that context, he says, I am the one who covers my chickens with my wings. I'm the one who give my life, who will never stop nursing and nurturing my children. So as a mother, he brings out the nurturing, protective, tender nature of the woman that a child needs to feel whole and comforted and loved. But he also presents the authority and protection and provision of the father that a child needs to feel loved and provided for and secure in a world with many dangers. And those two qualities is what God had intended in Genesis when he says, I created you male and female. Go forth and multiply.
So that was actually the image, because as you're saying, God not only created man and woman, but that was the image he was desiring to create, and that's the image he presents himself with, as even in Scripture. And it's interesting because, Pastor, the more I've listened to us talk here, it seems to me that then every family is being given that same mandate to go out, multiply, be fruitful and multiply, and make something of the world. Thank you for listening to this episode of Let Us Go Deeper. Let Us Go Deeper is an independent ministry, and your support is critical to our operations. Please make any contributions that you can to patreon.com/LUGD. That is patreon.com/LUGD.